Okay, I think this will work. So good morning, great to see you 2 days in a row. I wanted to bring you into my studio today to demonstrate one, a very important step that you're going to need for building your own sculpture or mask, which is called slipping and scoring. And it's how you attach pieces together within a sculpture, specifically a clay sculpture, so that when you put it in the kiln, it doesn't fall apart, basically. Because if I were to take a piece of clay, first, I want to be sure that you can see well. I've got a view of my face, and then I've got a view of my workspace. So if you pin both of those videos or both of those windows, you should be able to see a little bit better as opposed to the gallery view. So I got my windows set up for that. So I started off with my base, right? So this is where most people got to in class yesterday, having something that you're gonna build upon. So this is the start of your gesture. And if I were to take just a piece of clay like this kind of wonky sphere here and stick it on and do nothing more than apply pressure, what's gonna happen to it? Go ahead, Miriam.
It might pop off later.
Yeah, it would pop off because the only thing that's holding it right now is moisture, kind of like a suction cup. So we want to slip and score. We want to do this process of really combining the clay better than just pushing it on. Before I do that, I wanted to show you a couple examples of masks that I've made that are at home. And so since I'm here, this should work better than bringing them into class. So I did a series of four masks that were based on the seasons. And so I bet you can guess this one. What season is this? Let's call it out.
Spring.
Spring. I could see that it might be spring if it were a particularly cold spring. But my intention was for it to be winter. So I'm imagining that this is someone who is both enshrouded in something to keep her warm, and it's a winter scene on a mountain. So these pieces up here are intended to be little pine trees covered in snow that sort of eventually shifts into this person's face. So how I made this one was I didn't even really have a plan before I started. I just started kind of making things and piecing them together. And eventually this came out of it. And in fact, this is what inspired the other ones that I ended up making beyond after this one. But basically I rolled out a flat piece of clay and I picked it up and then I dropped it. When I dropped it, and that was an accident. When I dropped it, it made this sort of cool fold that reminded me of fabric. And then from there, just my ideas started flowing and I started piecing it all together. So this one was, like I said, the first one that inspired me to think, oh, this makes me feel a little bit like the season of winter. Maybe I'll try some other ones. So later on, I made this one that was intended to feel like summer, where like everything green, all the plants are just so lush, they're big, they're really green and just like everywhere, right? So in my garden, I grow things like squash and grapes. And so these parts were inspired by things that I saw in my garden. And so I worked with like the same base, which is kind of like a human like form, and then just covered it with these clay leaves. So in this instance, I just took some leaves that I found outside and rolled them into clay, like put them on a flat piece of clay, rolled over it with a rolling pin, and then cut it out and pulled the leaf off. And the leaf created this texture that made it look, fairly convincing for a grape leaf and a squash leaf. So think about how you can create textures, what you can press into it like a stamp. We've got stamps in the studio things that look kind of like this. You can also make these. This is just made out of clay. So if I hold this up here, right? I mean, I'm sure you get the idea, but here we go. The lighting's not great, but I can press into it to create some interesting textures. And textures is going to be a big part of one of the elements that you have to create an expressive sculpture. So all that being said, I wanted to start to build my example that I've brought up in class of working with this idea of voice and working with two animals, a bison and a bird, to piece them together to represent how my voice is undergoing transformation and all the things that I have been thinking about. So I'm going to set these aside. And I'm actually going to get rid of some of that texture from before. Maybe as close as I can get. So if I'm working with a bison, I am going to decide to find some reference images. So this is something that if you have a clear idea of an animal, or like, I don't know, if you're doing something more robotic, if you have images of like metal panels and bolts and things, or if you're doing something more plant-like, whatever it is that you're working with, if it's something that exists in life, it's helpful to have a reference image. So I would invite you to print those out and bring them to class. So I looked up some images just real quickly on Google Images, and I realized for a bison, it has this long snout. The nose is really prominent, the ears and the horns, and also this like really sturdy brow. So those are the things that I'm thinking about as I'm building my piece. And so the first thing I would consider is creating that snout out of this. So I'm going to grab some clay. And it's just kind of an amorphous blob right now, but that's what I want. And I'm going to, now this is the part that I wanted you really to take away from today, is this idea of attaching, of scoring and slipping, or slipping and scoring. Scoring refers to making scratch marks, making scores across the parts of the clay that you're going to press together. So let me come up here. So this tool that I have at home is really just, I mean, it's basically 5, 6 needles that are kind of stuck next to each other, so I can make a bunch of score marks at a time. You can really do this with any tool. At school, we have metal ribs like this one, except that the edges are serrated like a steak knife, so those are nice to use. You could just use a needle tool, really anything to make some scratch marks in the clay. And then you're going to need some water. You could spray it on, or you could have a little bowl next to you. I'm just going to dip my fingers in this bucket of water and add some water on top of both parts that I'm going to be attaching. And then I'm going to score at least one more time. My clay is pretty soft, so I think score water, score again is enough. The harder that your clay becomes, the more times you want to go through this. Because what you're trying to do, the slip part of the slip and score name of this process, is the liquidy clay that starts to form. I'm not sure how well you can see this, but it's kind of like becomes sort of like a muddy texture. And that's what I want. So at that point, now I can press them together. I'm going to put a fair amount of pressure on it. And then I'm going to use my hands or any tool to start to blend what I'll call the seam between the two, so that visually I might not be able to even tell that they were two different pieces to begin with. So I'm starting to form some depth in creating a snout going out this direction. I can shape it with my hands. We also have these paddles at school, a few of them, that you can use to shape and move clay around as well, which is also the same as just using like the tabletop. Okay, so gesturally, the big picture shapes, I feel good about that as a start. Now I might think about, okay, where might the eyes go? I'm gonna press in right around here. And then I might grab some clay to figure out an ear shape. Roll up a ball and then pinch. And as I'm pinching, I'm trying to curve it too. That's what I've got so far. Tap the edge. And I might, before scoring it on, I might just see how it looks first and just start to stick it on just so I can decide if that's something that I want to attach, and then come back and score it. I'm going to work with that for a minute. Okay, graph is up and on. And just leave that there. Make sure that it looks like the right size. So now I've pulled out another piece of clay. I'm just rolling it on the table. And this is going to be my horn. So I want one side, I'm putting more pressure so that it makes kind of like a cone shape. So like a tapered coil. And I can pick it up and curve it. Tap this part down and then see that's a little too big for what I was imagining anyway. So I just cut off a piece. So this is what I'm working with so far. And I'm thinking their brow is like really forward and broad. So I think I might grab a little more clay and just think about how could I build up that brow part that overarches the eye socket. So I might start to think about something like that. Okay. Think about an eyeball. And then I'm even going to consider an eyelid and just pinch like a small bit and put it on top. And then on the bottom, some nostrils in there. So I'm certainly not getting to detail yet, and I know that I haven't fully attached these on, but I'm playing with some ideas. And here at this point, I look at it from the front, got it from the side. Here's another view where you have a little more light. This is what's happened so far. And so now I would ask myself, do I like it? Is it working out? And I think so. So I would go back and I would decide, okay, yes, I want to attach these pieces. I can pull them out, refine them a little bit more, and then start the scoring on both the base and the feature. some water. And I want you to recognize when I'm making these, at this point, I haven't rolled out a flat piece of clay and cut out a piece like a cookie cutter, right? Everything that I've been creating, I've focused on all of its 3 dimensions. None of these pieces are flat. They're all coming forward in space. They're all curved in some way, not that they have to be curved, but for mine, that makes sense. So I want you to avoid thinking of this like a flat collage where you're just cutting out flat shapes. We're working with depth now, both depth of thought and depth of like physical depth. So you really want to keep that in mind as you build whatever you're building. What questions are coming up for you so far? And can you see this well enough to be able to do it yourself later this week? I see a couple nods. Okay, I hope so. I can always show it to you closer up for those of you that will be in the studio. So in the same way as our drawings, I'm creating a gesture first. So it's all the big picture. It's all like the main forms. And then later I'll come back and think about any details. So in the case of this example, my feathers might be my details. So I really need to get like the main forms first. Forms just being the word for shape when we talk about 3 dimensions. I can push on it, reshape it. And thinking about bison kind of have this little like goatee thing that hangs off the end of their chin. So you might start to play around with what that would look like. Reform the nose. Things of that sort. Has this given you a better idea of how to go about your own project? I see a few nods, I hope so. Let's do a time check. I've got about 10 minutes or so. Let's see what else I can do in that time. I'm thinking too, as I'm building this, I'm not just trying to create something that looks like a bison. I'm trying to create something that feels strong and sturdy and like formidable. And so as I'm building it, I don't want it to look like a cute bison, right? I want it to really look kind of intimidating. I get, maybe that's not the right word, but formidable. And so more so than prioritizing it looking exactly like the bison that I see in my reference images, I'm really thinking about expression and the impact that it has. At least I'm trying to. And I'm starting to think this almost looks a little more goat-like. So I have to go back and think, okay, what's the difference here between these 2 animals? And does it matter so much for my idea? So now I'm starting to play a little bit with texture. And I'm seeing that just pulling clay with my fingers, this isn't even something I planned, but it's kind of working, is giving me something that feels a little bit like hair and a little bit, the shapes are feather-like. So this might be something that I explore a bit more. I'll go back to making my eye though in the meantime. scratching, aka scoring. And everything I've done so far today has been possible because my clay is pretty soft. And so as time goes on with your clay, or not even time so much, but like as long as it sits out, it will get drier. And so in storing your work in between classes, like we did yesterday, of wrapping it up in the wet paper towels and putting it in the plastic bags, is very important for you to be able to do what you want each time. And some things that are harder to do now when it's really soft are easier later. So like carving, doing carved textures that are nice and sharp is actually easier when it's a little bit harder. And those are kind of things that you just sort of figure out all throughout the process. And your idea is going to change throughout the process. Potentially you'll come up with something different than you had at the beginning, and that's totally fine. Okay, so I just put on that like lower eyelid, and all of a sudden I'm feeling like it's starting to look a little bit more buffalo-like. I'm trying to figure out how you can see it. There's something about that like area underneath the eye that I think helps get it to where I want it to be. Poor Kate Graff. She's been hopping in and out of the waiting room trying to get connected. Okay. All right. Looks like we've taken us right to the end. I hope that was helpful to you. And if nothing else, I hope you take away this idea of slipping and scoring so that your piece can stay there. Any questions right now? Okay, so before we get back together on Friday, if you have like a clear idea of something that you're referencing that exists in life, bring a reference image. I think that'll be helpful to you for building your piece. So, all right, guys, happy Wednesday. It's gorgeous outside. I hope you can get out, enjoy the sun, take a walk. That's what I'm going to do next.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.